The vast majority of the construction projects are ending up being late and way over the initial projected budget cost. For why this happens, there are usually two main reasons. Either the company has set an unrealistic time frame to complete the work in the first place, or the project is suffering from unexpected delays. Both issues are basically two kinds of the very same thing. The longer the project is active, the more money you have to spend to keep it alive. Hence, when a project is expected to be finished in 2 years, but in the end it takes 4, time to complete this project is doubled, and so has likely the price as well. A lot of this misjudgment and bad planning comes from the fact that companies are being pushed to present much more attractive and at the same time unrealistic bids in order to get any work at all. With that said, in this video we are going to take a look at some of the most monumental budget busters in history. For the very first project on our list, we are going to visit Sydney in Australia, which is home to one of the most easily recognizable buildings in the world. The Opera House in Sydney. Once finished, this structure quickly became an icon of a city and one of Australia's most famous landmarks. What you might not know is that Opera House in Sydney is not only an iconic building, but also an iconic failure of a budget planning. Construction began in 1959 with a projected completion date in 1963 and with estimated cost of $56 million. In the end, the works were prolonged all the way to the 1973 and the ending price was $819 million. The project took 10 years longer than expected and the final figure was insane 14 times higher. Just imagine that if you told a project planner back in 1959 that his budget for this building is $819 million, he would be so confident as to tell you that with this kind of money, he could build you not one, not two, not three, but 14 identical buildings. So what happened? It would take a standalone video to cover the subject properly, but in short, government pushed work to begin early, fearing that the funding or a public opinion might turn against them. However, at that time the final designs were still not yet completed. As you might guess, starting construction of such a complex building without finalized designs didn't end up very well. For example, columns already built turned out to be not strong enough to support the roof structure, so it had to be completely rebuilt anew. Despite the not very commendable start, the Sydney Opera House was a groundbreaking project and it opened the way for the immensely complex geometries of a modern architecture. Being one of the first of its kind, however, required development of the never-before-used technologies, which took time and, as you already know, wasn't exactly cheap. Was it all worth it then? Oh yes, it was. Around 11 million people visit the Opera House every year. In fact, it became so popular that it is estimated that up to $1.2 billion are added to the Australian economy every year, thanks to the overall tourism boost this structure's fame provides. So even though the final total price was 14 times higher than expected, it is still able to pay it all up annually. Additionally, the Opera House in Sydney became a national icon, one of the very first things people think of when someone mentions Australia. And actually, thanks to this building, it is quite common among foreigners to often mistake Sydney for the capital of Australia. That's not bad at all for a building that probably wouldn't have ever been built if its real price would have been known beforehand. Next on our list, we have a real monstrosity. We are going to Hubei province in central China, where a massive hydroelectric dam spans Asia's longest river Yangtze. The Three Gorges Dam is, according to NASA, one of the few man-made structures that are visible to the naked eye from space. The structure itself is 181 meters tall and spans 2,335 meters across. In 2012, it became, and it's been ever since, the most powerful hydroelectric dam in the world in terms of electricity generation. But according to Chinese government's 1992 proposal, the top reason for building the dam wasn't power generation, but to prevent flooding downstream. So it is quite ironic that the very thing that caused this project to go heavily over budget was the submerging of usable lands upstream. In 1992, it was expected that the whole project would cost $8.35 billion and that it would be fully operational by 2009. In the end, the additional projects delayed full operation until 2012, and the final cost was $37.23 billion. That is 4 times more than expected, which would not sound so bad if we were not throwing tens of billions around. So now the question is, what happened? Additional projects, which were not part of the original plan, added a lot to the final cost. However, what really blew up the budget were the costs tied with resettling of people from submerged areas. Water levels have risen as far as 600 kilometers away. Right at the dam, water level rose up to 90 meters. To make a way for the dam's massive reservoir, about 1.4 million people were uprooted, their ancestral homes demolished and flooded. In frightening total, 2 cities, 140 towns and 1,680 villages along the river banks just gone. You know, this is the kind of thing that makes me really appreciate that I live in a small country with a total population of just 10 millions, where 1 million is a significant force and not just some small price to pay for a greater good. So was it all worth it? Answer to this is a matter of dispute. On one hand, the dam is producing a significant amount of clean energy, and it's been helpful in intercepting floods. On the other hand, there was, as mentioned earlier, a rather grisly human price to pay by the villagers that lived on the banks of the river for centuries. Many cultural and historic sites were submerged. The dam has also had a serious geological impact. The huge weight of water had started to erode the banks in many places, which together with frequent fluctuation in water levels had triggered a series of landslides. Additionally, in 2020, Yangtze Basin saw its heaviest average rainfall in nearly 60 years, and not even the massive reservoir of Gorges Dam was able to intercept this flood. In fact, water in many places downstream rose to the highest levels in history, and to be honest, that's not exactly what you want to hear after you chase 1.4 million people out of their homes. Now, if you ask me, I think that Chinese just should have taken those 37 billions and just built 37 opera houses instead. If one opera house in Sydney is able to add $1.2 billion to the country's economy every year, just imagine what 37 of them could do. Now we are going to visit city of Montreal in Canada. In 1976, Montreal was to host the Summer Olympic Games. Event of this magnitude requires massive investments, and in fact every Olympics since 1960 has run over budget. For some, it was still well worth it. Investments can be well placed in infrastructure that will find use even long after the Olympics are over, and in that way be worth the cost. Montreal, however, wasn't one of those. Just to put you in a picture, the average cost overrun for Olympics is 176%. From the more recent games, Rio 2016 was 51% over budget, London 2012 76%, but the Montreal Olympics of 1976 went 720% over budget. If you were ever, by chance, to host the Olympic Games, the Summer Olympics of 1976 would be actually a great example of what not to do. Now we are looking at the main culprit, the Big O, or as it was mockingly nicknamed later the Big O, in reference to the astronomical construction cost, is a stadium that was built as the main venue of 1976 Summer Olympic Games. Even today, seating capacity of 56,000 makes it the largest stadium in Canada. Incorporated into the north base of the stadium is Montreal Tower, the world's tallest inclined tower, which stands tall at 175 meters. World's tallest inclined tower, now that's something, ain't it? I'm sure that's a dream come true for everyone in Montreal. Who wouldn't want to have the world's tallest inclined tower, right? But to be fair, it's a pretty damn impressive building. The tower wasn't built just to break some silly record. Stadium has a retractable roof, which is opened and closed by the cables attached to the tower. Roof can be opened for summer and closed again for winter, in this way allowing year-round use. Or at least that was the idea. Construction began in 1973 and was supposed to be finished before the Olympics in 1976. With the initial budget being $134 million. It soon became obvious that's not going to happen. When the time of the Olympic came, stadium was roofless and without a tower, but in a usable enough state. Opening and closing ceremonies with sports competitions were held there. After the Olympics, construction speed was slowed down to a snail pace. And it took another 11 years until the retractable roof and the tower were fully completed in 1987. The final cost is difficult to determine. Estimates ranges from $1.5 billion up to $3 billion. far above what was expected, and it makes Montreal Olympic Stadium to be the project with the worstly predicted budget I managed to find. Just a little note here, the total operating budget for the whole Olympics was originally set by Montreal to $160 million. So what happened? Time to complete the construction was unrealistically short. 3 years just weren't enough to get it all done. With harsh Canadian winters that each year stopped the works completely, it is even kind of impressive that the stadium was usable on the day of the Olympics. During the 1973 and 74, it even looked optimistic on occasions. But then in 1975, workers went on strike lasting from May to October, putting the whole thing completely off schedule. The costs were blown up mainly by delays, renovations, repairs, upkeep, by bad material choices and late design changes. There are also reports that a practice called feather bedding was in use. That is when a construction company brings to the construction site far more workers and equipment than is necessary. That doesn't really speed up the construction process, but it increases total cost of the project and at the same time increases profits for the construction companies. So was it worth it then? Stadium generates on average about $20 million a year, and it took over 30 years to pay off its astronomical debt. To the question if it was worth it, the vast majority will say no. On one hand, it is an impressive and iconic building, and, don't forget, the world's tallest inclined tower. On the other hand, its uses are very limited. Remember the retractable roof? Nowadays it is permanently closed. Still, it tears up to 500 times a year, and costs about $500,000 annually to upkeep. What's more, the stadium is not safe to use if there is more than 3 centimeters of snow covering the roof. And yes, we are still in Canada, where snow is the equivalent of rain in Britain, or sunny day on Sahara. This means that the stadium is basically unusable for about half of the year. Currently they are planning to replace the roof with a new one which will allow round-year use, and should be installed by 2023. This new roof is estimated to cost $250 million, increasing the price tag by a significant amount once again. There are many voices scoring for dismantling of this concrete behemoth. However, despite that, people in charge are still trying to turn things around and make the stadium more usable. Realizing a project on schedule and budget is hard enough even when your feet are firmly on the ground. So now imagine how much tougher it is when your project is in a goddamn orbit. International Space Station was one of the first large-scale collaborative projects where teams from all over the world, using different languages, different units of measurements, had to design and build thousands of components that fit together. 5 space agencies, NASA from USA, Roscosmos from Russia, JAXA from Japan, ESA from Europe and CSA from Canada, had joined the effort to realize this project. Nowadays, the International Space Station is approximately the size of the football field, is orbiting 400 km above the Earth, and its orbital speed is 27,600 km per hour. For something called station, it's not exactly stationary. 19 minutes is all it needs to circle the globe. In fact, it can accomplish 15.5 orbits per day, and it has managed to circle the globe at around 135,000 times in total since the launch of the very first module in 1998, which, by the way, was already 4 years behind the schedule. Now that's something important to explain. The ISS is a modular space station. That means that the whole project is divided in smaller parts, called modules. Modules can be independently created, added, modified or exchanged. You can imagine it as sort of a super expensive Lego blocks. This allows for a lot of flexibility and makes it possible to add new extensions later on if it's considered worth it. The works on International Space Station designs were initiated in 1993. It was expected that the assembly will be completed in 2002 and that it will cost $70.3 billion. In the end, the ISS was finished in 2011 and costs went up to $100 billion. Costs, however, are still growing to this date. Just the annual upkeep of the station is around $4 billion, and the total price is today estimated to be at $160 billion. So it comes as no surprise if I tell you that the International Space Station holds a title for being the most expensive object ever built. So what happened? Project of this scope had no precedent, so it was very hard to predict correctly just how expensive or how long it would take to finish it. As mentioned before, by the time the very first module was launched, the project was already 4 years behind the original schedule. Each year of delay was adding a scary amount to the price tag, among others thanks to the astronomical upkeep and resupply costs. It was calculated that the price for 1 kilogram delivered aboard the Sidon spacecraft was $90,000. That is $2,000 for a single lemon, $2,059 for a set of bagpipes, or $40,000 for a gorilla costume. So was it all worth it? Back in 1993, when this endeavor began, it was hard to find anyone who'd be very optimistic about it. The International Space Station was in fact a successor cancelled project for a US exclusive space station with a very un-American name, Freedom, which was abandoned 10 years into making. In fact, by the time the very first module for the ISS made it to space, the original planned space station Freedom, according to the initial plans, was supposed to be in the orbit fully assembled for 4 years already. A lot of people thought that with the new space station the story would just repeat itself, and nothing much would come out of it in the end. But nowadays, mostly everyone agrees that it was pretty damn worth it, if not necessary as the next step in man-made space exploration. The worth will be proved in the future once the results of tests and experiments are put into practice. However, what is invaluable is the established close cooperation of many different countries and private industries, which is hoped to continue in some form even after the days of ISS are over. On that note, it might surprise you that by now the station was supposed to be a charred heap lying at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean for about 5 years already. In 2009, as the ISS was still being assembled, it was agreed that it would last for 6 years, and then be deorbited and sent down to its demise. The fact that the International Space Station is still orbiting the Earth to this day is proof in itself of its worth. Currently, the US government wants to support the space station program until 2030. Russia, however, want to pull out by 2025 and launch their own space station. Without Russian contribution, it is likely that the end of the space station might come sooner. However, that might not be such a bad thing. The main downside of the ISS program is the upkeep price. It is sucking up so much from the annual budget of NASA that they can hardly afford to finance anything else as long as they are keeping the ISS alive. Hence the demise of the International Space Station could free their hands and allow them to jump on new exciting projects. And now, let's answer the question you all are certainly asking.
My name is Jeff.
How many international space stations could Jeff Bezos afford if he was to spend all his net worth? 1. Just 1. Now that's pretty weak, Jeff. I think you should up your game a little bit. It might interest you, or not, that for his net worth he could get 241 Sydney Opera Houses, 5 free Gorges Dams, or 98 Olympic stadiums in Montreal. That's 98 world's tallest inclined towers. God damn it!